So here we are, and welcome back to part 2 of this multi-part guide on creating the Battle Royale Ring. In the first video we took a look at the maths behind creating the coordinates around the circle for the ring that we need, and in this video we are going to look at how we can use that maths to create a set of coordinates that we will then go on and place the AI players at. We will be using some more advanced techniques today, and in this video we will be looking at the use of arrays as well as the maths that we used in the last video in order to set a set of coordinates for the AI players in the ring. If you enjoy watching this video, if you learn something from it, really appreciate you clicking the subscribe button and helping me on my way to my 500 subscribers. Click the like button, and don't forget, if you click follow you'll get notified of when the next video is released. Going to move very quickly onto this video, so here we go into the rules editor. So here we are back in the editor, and we're just going to make the basic settings. So we are going to run a free-for-all game mode again, as we have been doing so far, and then we're just going to move on to map rotation. Now, of course, you can choose whichever map you want. We do have to be careful with dimensions, because if we actually deploy the AI players or indeed ourselves in a position that isn't actually on the map, that's going to break the logic. So for this particular game mode, I'm just going to go down and I'm going to choose Breakaway, which is the largest map as far as I know. I'm going to click plus, and we're going to use the breakaway map for this particular demonstration. In the modifier, we're just going to change a couple of other things because we are going to need some AI players. Now I'm going to set our human players down to 1. This is really just for me to experiment with and just to demonstrate with. And I'm also going to, under modifiers, do a couple of things with the AI. So to begin with, we're going to set play versus environment. Obviously, if you set this game mode up yourself, you're going to go with PvP if you wanted to turn it into an actual game mode. So we're just going to crank up the AI players, and at the moment they have set a cap of 30 AI players that we're allowed to spawn in at the moment. We'll work with that. You'll see that that works fine for what we want to use them for, and we're going to deploy them everywhere. We're just going to take off the sync modifiers. We are going to make a few alterations just to make these really dumb AI soldiers, so we're going to slow down the movement speed. It's not going to matter because we are actually going to move them ourselves and all kinds of stuff, but we are going to just reduce the AI damage multiplier just in case they get a little bit aggressive and want to attack us. We don't want that to happen. And we are going to turn their maximum health all the way up, crank it up so that they can't be killed, because we don't want that to happen. And that's it in terms of just the basic settings. So don't forget, free for all, biggest map that we can do. Turn on the AI, and we're just setting this to PvE for practice, and set the AI count at 30. You'll see that I've just named this Battle Royale Ring demo, and when I save it, we're ready to go. So now we're going to go into the rules editor, and this is where the fun begins with the Battle Royale. So how are we going to create this ring of players around a central point? Well, the first thing that we need to do is pick a central point on the map where we are going to deploy all of these players. Now, I have surveyed the map breakaway previously, and I've got a decent central point all worked out. Again, one of my earlier videos showed you how to work out different coordinates on the map, and I came up with a center position that was quite reasonable of x minus 10 and z minus 175. Now we're going to set up some variables that we need in order to make this work. So the first one is going to be, and we're probably going to need some more as we go along, but we're going to put a plot center x. We're going to create that one. That's the x position on the map that we want. We're going to place another one, so plot center z, and we're going to create that one. Okay, so those are going to be the two values of the x and z positions on the map, give us the exact position in the map. And we're going to set those variables right at the beginning of the match on game mode started. So set plot center x, we need a literal, set that to minus 10. And we are going to set another variable. We are going to set plot center Z. We'll set that to -175. As I say, if you're wondering where those figures come from, I have just surveyed them out beforehand and worked out those as the best place to go. In addition, so this circle that we're plotting on the map needs a center point, which we've now got, and then we need to know the radius of the map, how far out the ring is going to go. So it makes sense that we're going to need another variable for that. Manage variables, new variable, we'll call this ring circle, actually, circle radius. We'll create that one, and we're going to make this quite big initially as the first ring, so we'll call that radius, and we will duplicate that, and we will set that to 500. So that's quite a large radius for a ring, and we'll see how big that is on the map. So that's the first step. Set all the variables that we need to lay out the circle on the map. So the next thing that we need is we need to start creating the coordinates that will plot around the radius. Now if you imagine, we are going to place AI players at varying points around the ring. What we need to know is where those coordinates are going to be. In order to create the coordinates, or in order to keep track of the coordinates that we are going to plot around the circle, I am going to use something called an array. Now if you don't understand what an array is, think of it a little bit like a table, and if you look at the screen at the moment, you can see that I'm showing an example of what that might look like. And we use this table to store data in it, and the data that we store in it is stored in rows, and each row has a number. You can see that the number of the rows starts from 0 and counts upwards. So the first row in the table, or in our array, is row 0, and we can store some data in that row. The next row is row 1, and we can store some data in that row. So what we are going to do is we are going to create an array, and at each position in that array is going to be a set of coordinates that is a different position on the ring. If you think of the ring as though it was a clock, and we wanted to store something at position 0, which might be the top, then 1, then 2, then 3 around the ring, then we can use an array to store those coordinates. So the first thing is we are going to need to create the variable to hold the array. I'm going to create a variable, manage variables, and I'm going to call this ring coordinates. Sorry, spell that wrong. Create. We'll close that. And then when the game starts, we are going to set that ring coordinates to be an empty array. We're going to set off with an empty one. So the next thing that we're going to do is fill this ring array with a bunch of coordinates that we can then drop our AI players into. Now in actual fact, because of a development that we may want to do later on, I'm going to move these calculations that we're going to create into a subroutine, so we can at any point generate these ring coordinates. So now we have used subroutines before, and they are just a little block of code that we can call from our main block. So I'm going to call this create ring coordinates, just like that. Okay, we'll just click on the screen, we'll just move that in place, and we're going to put all of the code to create the coordinates in here. Now in actual fact, I put this set variable empty array, I created these ring coordinates down at the bottom, but actually now thinking about it, it makes more sense if whenever we create these ring coordinates that we do it in this subroutine. So I've just moved that up there. The next thing is we need to decide how many AI players are going to go around the edge, and we need to create a record in the array for each one of those AI players. So we know when we went into the menu earlier on that we were allowed a maximum of 30 AI players, and we're going to use all 30 AI players around the edge of the ring. Now just an important note about an array. Arrays in a battlefield start on row 0. So the first coordinate will be in row 0. If we have 30 coordinates for 30 AI players, the last coordinate will be at row 29, not row 30. That makes sense. We didn't start at row 1, we started at row 0. If we started at row 1, the last one would be at 30, because we would count from 1 to 30. But if we start at row 0, our last one will be at row 29. Now we're going to use something that we haven't used before, and we're going to use a loop, because we're going to make our life easy. We could, if we wanted to, put into the array each individual coordinate. So we could set at position 1 a coordinate, then we could set at position 2, and we could do that all the way through. However, it is much easier if we use a little bit of maths. We can place this in a loop. Now I understand, again, some of you might get lost a little bit here as I go through this. Don't worry too much, just copy the code as I go along and then take a little bit of time to digest it. So we're going to use a loop, and we're going to do this type of loop, loop variable. And we don't have a variable at the minute that we're going to use as a loop. This is called a fixed loop, and it basically means, if we just have a look at the help, you can see it starts a series of actions that execute in a loop, modifying the control variable on each iteration. If the control variable reaches or passes the range end value, the loop exits, and execution continues through the remaining actions in the rules. Basically what it's saying is we need a variable, this one, and that variable is going to count from this value to this value and be incremented or stepped up by that value. So if we say loop variable number from 1 to 10 by 1, this loop will execute 10 times, and while it is executing, this variable number will count from 1 to 10. So it'll be 1, then it'll be 2, then it'll be 3, then it'll be 4. And we can use that if we want to fill up our array of 30 coordinates. We can use this to loop 30 times and set the coordinates in it, if we know how to do a little bit of maths. So we just need a variable to act as a count variable. I'm going to call this, let's call this index position, because really that's what it represents. Getting that global variable. Okay, and we are going to use that in our loop. So loop variable index position from, we need a literal, sorry, from 0 to 29. So that loop variable is going to count from 0 to 29, and each time it goes through the loop we want it to go up by 1. So this is going to be 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, etc. all the way up to 29, at which point it will stop. The next thing is to get the coordinates into the array. Now I'm going to break this up a little bit, because if I do it all as one big long line of code, two things are going to happen. One is it's going to be very difficult for you to see on the screen, and two, you're going to get lost a little bit. So in order to just break this down a little bit further, I'm going to have to create an additional couple of variables. You'll see why in a minute, but I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to call this temp position x. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that to create a value for the x coordinate that we're going to store in this array. I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call this temp position z, and we're going to use that to temporarily store the z position coordinate. And then once we have calculated the temporary x position and the temporary z position, we're going to store them together as a complete coordinate in the array. Now, like I said, we could do this all at once, but we're going to do it this way just to make it a little bit easier for you to follow. So the first thing that we need to do, now we're ready really to calculate the x and z positions all the way around the ring. So we need to remember back to the beginning about the calculations using sine and cosine in order to figure out the position on the ring. Now I'm just going to work through that again. So we're going to go with variables. We're going to set a variable in this loop, and we are going to set the temp position x. So if we want to work out what the x coordinate is on the outer part of the ring, we need to take the x coordinate of the center of the ring and then add to that whatever the radius is multiplied by the cosine of the angle. Now again, if you don't understand that, you need to go back to the beginning of the video and just have a quick run through the maths. But basically, to work out the coordinates, if we were in the centre, we'd just do radius multiplied by the cosine of the angle. But here we need to offset that a little bit by the current centre. So the calculation that we're going to do to calculate the x on the edge of the ring will be the centre coordinate of the x plus the radius multiplied by the cosine of the angle that we want. So I'm going to give you an example to begin with, and let's start off. So we need whatever the current centre x position is. Let's get some maths because we're going to do a bit of addition, aren't we? Let's do this separate from the actual thing itself. Let's move it here. This is a calculation. Let's move that down there. So we need to add to the x position of the centre whatever the radius is multiplied by the cosine of the angle. So we need maths, and we need to multiply. Where's multiply? Let's find it. Multiply. We need to multiply whatever the current radius is. So remember, we got that in a variable, haven't we? Get variable, circle radius. We need to multiply that by the cosine of the angle. So let's get cosine. That's under maths as well. Now you'll see we've got two options. We've got cosine from degrees and cosine from radians. I'm not going to go too much into that. Degrees is the standard kind of angle that you recognise. Radians is often used as an alternative, but for this purpose we're going to use degrees. So we've got cosine from degrees. And then we need to put a value in there, which is the angle that we are trying to calculate. So if I put in there a literal and put in there a number, and put 45 degrees, then that is going to give us the x coordinates on the edge of the circle for this radius at 45 degrees. Okay, so it's quite a long sum, is that? Alright, I'm just going to leave it there for a moment. Now that isn't the total answer, unfortunately, for this. It just gets a little bit more complicated, because if we have this cosine from degrees, we need to keep changing the angle that we are looking at depending on whereabouts we are on the ring. So now if you can follow me with this, that's going to be great. If not, don't worry, again I'm just going to give you the maths that you need. But if we have a 360 degree circle, if we divide that by the number of segments, so in this case that is 30 segments, because we have 30 AI players, we need 30 points. So if we take 360 degrees and divide that by the number of segments that we want, so that will be 30, one for each AI player, we get the incremental angle that we need for each player. Then all we need to do is multiply that by the player number, let's call it, or in this case the index position. We will get an increasing angle as we go all the way around. If I can use something a little bit simpler, so rather than using 30 segments, let's imagine that we only have 10. If we divide 360 by 10, we will get the angle 36. That is, so 360 would divide up into 36. If we then multiply that by 0, we will get an angle of 0. So we will know that the first angle will be at 0. If we multiply the 36 by 1, we will get a 36 degree angle. If we multiply the 36 by 2, we will get a 64 degree angle. And if we multiply the 36 by 3, we will get a 108 degree angle. So you can see that if we multiply up by the index position, we are going to increase the angle. And we're going to use that in our maths here. So we're just going to put together this final little bit at the end. So we are going to maths, then we're going to multiply. There we go. And we are going to multiply the current index position, variables, get variables, there we go, get variable, index position, and we are going to multiply that by maths, divide, and we're going to put 360 divided by 30, because that's how many segments. So we get the segments by dividing 360 by the number of segments that we want, and we multiply that by the index position to get an increasing angle. And I'm going to pop that in there. Actually, let me just leave that there for a moment. So that is, if you want it, that's the entire code that we need to work out what temp position X will be. I'll just leave that for a moment so you can copy it, but we are going to drag this multiply into there for the angle. And last but not least, we can drag all of that and place it into there. And that extraordinarily long function, just like that, is going to give us the temporary X position for the angle as we move around. Now in actual fact, if we want the Y position, this is very easy. We're going to duplicate, set variable, let's drop that there. And this time we are doing the Z position, so temp position Z, and we want to add the center Z to multiply the circle radius, and it's not the cosine that we want, it is the sine. Remember from our maths right at the beginning. Let's find it, there we go, sine from degrees, but we still want this block. So it's the same function as above, we're going to use sine from degrees, there we go. So let me just show you that. We've got the temp Z position and the temp X position. I think we're all sorted, let me just check. Yes, we are. Right, so we've got our coordinate. Now in actual fact, as we loop through, because the coordinate changes as the angle changes due to the index position, each time it goes through the loop it's going to give us a different position on the circle, and all we need to do is add that to our ring array coordinates. So in order to set the coordinates in the array, so in order to add these coordinates to our ring coordinate array, we need to get the arrays section and set variable at index. Then it needs to know which variable we are looking at. Well, it's this array with the ring coordinates that we want set. So set variable index. Actually, let's just have a look at this so we get a little bit of an understanding. You can see finds or initializes an array with a provided variable and stores a provided value in that array at the specified index. So we want the array. This is the index position that we want, so we're going to set it at 0, then at 1, then at 2, then at 3, then at 4, all the way up. And then we need to give a value to this array. You can see they've set it as event player, but we are going to provide it with some coordinates. So we need to get the variable, and we're going to drop that in there, and we want the index position. And last but not least, under maths, we need to create a vector, and we've seen us using this before. This vector needs an X, a Y, and a Z position. Well, we've got the X position that we want to set there. So let's get the variable. We want plot center X. We don't want that. We want temp position X. And if we just move along, the Z position goes at the end. So we'll just duplicate that variable and set that to temp position Z. And then finally, what's the Y position? Well, the Y position is an interesting one. And we're going to see how this behaves when we run the program. However, what's an interesting piece of behavior with the AI players is if we set this Y value to be very low, so for example put them underground, they will automatically go all the way up until they find ground. It won't allow you to place them underneath the map. So you'll see how that works when we look at it, but for now let's get ourselves another literal and drag that in, and we will set that to be minus 200. And there we go. Right, this is now complete. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, but you might find this difficult to read because obviously it's quite a long piece of code, and if you're reading this on a small screen, that's going to be very difficult. I'm just going to hide this at the edge. Let's get rid of the toolbox at the side, so we can see that that is my complete code for this particular section. Just pause it there. Now that's excellent. Now, if you didn't understand some of that, don't worry too much. Just create the subroutine and you will have a small subroutine that will plot a bunch of coordinates around a circle and create vectors for them in order for you to place things on that circle if you wish. And the only thing left for us to do is to make sure that this subroutine runs when the game starts. So we'll just bring out our toolbox again, toggle toolbox. We will go down to subroutines. We're going to get the subroutine and we are going to pop it on the end there. And that's it. So that brings us to the end of the second part of this guide, and we now have the coordinates all ready to place the AI players on the ground in a ring pattern. And we have learned quite a few new skills as we've gone along. We have used a fixed loop and seen how one of those works. We've also learned how to do the maths that we learned in the first part of the video, as well as place values into an array for use later on. The next part of the video will be the final part where you'll actually see the results of what we've been working on and where you will finally place the AI players on the ground in a circle and get the final results. Obviously, if you've liked this video and you are enjoying it so far, don't forget to click the like button. Please click subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to click the follow button to get notified of the next guide in the series. I am going to push this guide a little bit further once these are complete, but there may well be a gap after the next video while I get the final parts prepared. For now, thanks for watching. See you soon.